Let's jump right in and unpack the invisible economic forces that literally govern our everyday lives. Now, I know you might think economics is just a messy tangle of stock market tickers, banking jargon, and, complex math. But honestly, it's so much more approachable than that. It is quite literally the manual to the real world, and it dictates how we make choices every single day. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, what is economics? Second, facts versus ideals. Third, goods and services explained. Fourth, the weird world of goods. And finally, understanding utility. All right, part one. What is economics? Let's decode where this massive, sometimes super intimidating concept actually comes from. It's really fascinating, actually, because at its core, economics isn't about Wall Street at all. It's simply about managing a household and dealing with resource scarcity. The word itself comes from the ancient Greek term oikonomikos. Oikos translates to household, and nomos means management, custom, or law. So when you strip away all that modern complexity, economics is basically just the study of how a household manages its limited resources to satisfy its wants and needs over time. Now, it's pretty interesting to see the hard line economics draws here. For example, a mother's care for her child, or just going out and playing a game of cricket for fun. Those are completely excluded simply because they don't involve wealth. Economics only concerns itself with human activities that are tied to wealth, production, and how we allocate resources. If an activity isn't related to wealth, economists call it a non-economic activity, and it just isn't part of the subject matter. That definitely doesn't mean those activities aren't incredibly valuable to society, right? It just means they operate completely outside the specific lens of economic study. Moving on to part two, facts versus ideals. Building on that basic definition, let's establish the rules of the game. How do economists actually separate objective reality from subjective opinion? Well, the absolutely crucial point here is that positive economics is all about what is, while normative economics steps into the messy realm of what should be. When economists look at the facts and examine the direct causes of an economic problem without any personal bias whatsoever, they're practicing positive economics. But the very second they start drawing conclusions based on subjective things, like bringing in social, cultural, political, or religious viewpoints to decide if something is good or bad, they've crossed over into normative economics. To brilliantly illustrate the difference, let's look at two statements. If you say when irrigation facilities and the use of fertilizers expand, the production of food grains increases, well, you're simply stating a verifiable positive economic fact. It's just a cause and an effect. However, if you say inequalities in the distribution of wealth and income should be reduced, you're making a normative statement. You're expressing a subjective ideal about what you believe is genuinely good for society. It's a goal, not just a raw fact. Which brings us to part three, goods and services explained. Now that we've got the ground rules established, we can look at the actual tools of economics, the tangible things that satisfy our human wants. Material items like cars, phones, or clothing are what we call goods, and they all share some very specific physical traits. First is tangibility, meaning you can physically touch them. Then there's perishability, which just means they degrade over time. You can also separate them from their owner to store in a warehouse, you can standardize their quality during mass production, and you can easily transfer ownership of them from a seller to a buyer. We can basically split these goods down the middle. On one side, we have consumer goods. These are the things you and I buy to satisfy our immediate wants, like a durable television that sits in your living room for years, or non-durable goods, like a loaf of bread or fresh fruit that gets used up fast. On the flip side, we have capital goods. These are the heavy assets like factory machines or industrial tractors that don't directly satisfy a consumer's want. Instead, businesses use them to actually produce the consumer goods that we eventually buy. Conversely, we have services. While a good is a physical object, a service is an intangible action. They are heterogeneous, which is just a fancy way of saying the service you receive can vary wildly based on geography, cultural background, or quality standards. Just think about how totally different a doctor's visit can be from one clinic to another. And perhaps most uniquely, services are inseparable. You literally cannot separate the physical labor from the specific person providing that service to you. Educational services, like a live university lecture, are a perfect example of this. They're totally intangible and highly perishable. Or think about a ticket to a cricket match. Once that final ball is bowled and the match is over, the ticket is completely useless. Services just cannot be stored in a giant warehouse like physical inventory. You have to consume the service exactly when it's being provided, or the opportunity vanishes forever. Okay, let's get into part 4, the weird world of goods. So now that we know the standard definitions of goods and services, let's explore a really fascinating paradox. Normally, if something gets more expensive, people buy less of it, right? It makes total sense. But economists discovered 2 incredibly weird exceptions to this rule, where higher prices actually trigger people to buy more of the item. These are known as Giffen goods and Veblen goods, and for both of them, demand rises as the price rises, but for entirely opposite reasons. Let's break that down. A Giffen good is a low-priced absolute necessity, like wheat, rice, or bread. If you're struggling financially and the price of bread goes up, you might not be able to afford meat at all anymore. So, counterintuitively, you actually have to buy more bread just to meet your basic caloric needs, simply because there are very few cheap substitutes for survival. A Veblen good, on the other hand, is a premium, super exclusive luxury item. The demand for a Veblen good, like a multi-million-dollar sports car, goes up as the price rises purely because that insane price tag grants the buyer exclusive status. In that case, the expense is quite literally the entire point. And that brings us to our final section, part 5, understanding utility. This is the fundamental driver behind every single economic action we take. To tie all these building blocks together, we really have to ask, why do we actually want these goods and services anyway? Whether it's a basic consumer good, a complex service, or some crazy luxury Veblen item, what is the invisible force compelling us to manage our households and trade our hard-earned resources for these things in the first place? Well, economists call this utility. It's a highly subjective, basically unmeasurable concept that simply describes an item's ability to satisfy a specific need. It's important to remember that utility isn't about whether something is morally good or universally valuable. Not at all. It is entirely about the want-satisfying power provided to one specific individual at a specific time and a specific location. It is, simply put, the reason we assign value to anything at all. There's a great quote that perfectly captures this essence. A patient gets utility from taking medicine, but medicines do not give him pleasure. We so often confuse utility with happiness or joy, but economics treats them very differently. Think about it. A terrible-tasting cough syrup has enormous utility when you're sick, even though it provides absolutely zero joy. The utility lies strictly in its ability to satisfy your biological want to get healthy. And utility actually manifests in several totally different ways. A block of wood has form utility once it's been carved into a usable chair. A heavy winter coat has massive time utility in December, but pretty much zero in July. Place utility means having clean, running water right inside your home rather than miles away at a river. Service utility comes directly from the specialized skills of professionals like doctors or teachers. And finally, possession utility is just the pure satisfaction of finally owning an item outright. But keep in mind, the more you consume of a single good, the less utility each additional unit gives you. Economists call this the law of diminishing utility. So, look around you. Think about the items in your own personal household management system, and really ask yourself what kind of utility they bring to your life. Now that you understand the true nature of scarcity, the big difference between positive facts and normative ideals, and the downright weird ways we value certain goods, I want to leave you with this thought. Look at the things you spend your limited wealth on. Are you buying them for their actual true want-satisfying power? Or are you maybe caught up in a cycle of buying premium Veblen goods just to impress people? Understanding the basics of economics isn't just dry textbook theory. It's honestly the key to mastering your own reality.